As of 2026, there are a lot of Pokemon fan games, many of whom are really good, and for those of us who've been consistently playing them for years, that's awesome. Yet the more Pokemon fan games that release, the harder it becomes for newcomers or even casuals with not much free time to decide what's next or even what's first. Which is why I've compiled a short list of fan projects that don't wander too far from Game Freak's standard formula, but still have that charm that screams, oh, a fan made this. And the first on that list is Pokemon Itinerant. The way I'd describe this game in a single sentence is a little bit of everything, but not too much of one thing. You're forced to cut your vacation short when a series of unfortunate events places you and your best friend into a foreign region that conveniently has 8 gyms and an evil team up to no good. I will not lie that the story is fairly simple, though it's not mindless, nor is it put together just to tell you where to go next. The game does a nice job of handling the few characters present and progressing them through the plot. It's still not something I suggest playing for the story, though. What you should play it for is if you want a lot of Pokemon to capture, battles that require basic levels of thinking to get through, and terastallization. The challenge level of important bosses is not effortless. I personally found them easy because I do not like using more than 2 Pokemon of the same type, which usually leads to me building very flexible teams in almost any game I play. Gym leaders still use terastallization in interesting ways, and because it only has one use in between Pokécenter visits, it's not a mechanic you can spam to steamroll every single trainer. This game is not complicated. It is basic in the most positive way I can call something basic. Despite that, it still has a visual personality. I have a soft spot for the Fire Red and Emerald art style. I just don't like seeing the same default tile sets used over and over again. Itinerant keeps the charm, consistency, and simplicity of the 3rd generation overworld, while looking more vibrant and colorful compared to those games. It is a simple and small region that retains the excitement of something new around every corner. However, I did find one flaw with this game I need to be upfront about. The EXPL is not very balanced. If you keep it on all the time and even skip half the route trainers, you will be overleveled. Luckily, this can be avoided by just turning it off when you feel you're starting to get too powerful, although I know that can be a little tedious. Pokemon Itinerant has gameplay mechanics up to Generation 9, 440 Pokemon available, and a nice handful of QOL. Like I said earlier, if you want a simple standard length game with little difficulty restrictions on your team building, this is the game for you. Before I continue, I want to tell you about this retro monster tamer that for a limited time only can be claimed for free. Dokimon Quest combines the visual and audible charm of old school Game Boy titles with the quality of life and retrospective game design we have today. It features a massive world to explore, packed with over 140 Dokimon. In the past 2 years since its release, the game has received so many free updates for people who already purchased the game, and now it's your turn to join them. Starting tomorrow, August 24th, at 10 a.m. PT, you'll have 48 hours to claim the base game, including everything I just mentioned, completely for free. Not only that, but the post-launch DLC content will also be on sale, including additional story content and new locations. That's just the tip of the iceberg, as I'm also here to announce Dokimon 2, an upcoming sequel. This game will allow you to explore both the world from the original and a version set 200 years in the past. It'll have a big focus on exploration, gathering, crafting, and whatever else you'll need to master to survive in this past time period. But until then, make sure you grab Dokimon Quest within the 48-hour period starting tomorrow, and a big thank you to them for sponsoring this video. Now, what if you wanted something bigger? A larger region with more Pokemon, and a greater focus on story without going overboard. I think Gadir Deluxe fits those requirements quite well. The format of the story is how you remember it: 8 gyms, a couple of rivals you meet along the way, and the antagonist group giving you a hard time with every other badge. Visual presentation is one of the 2 places I think this game stays consistently good. The variety of different biomes and locations is balanced well, and the areas themselves don't look messy or out of place. Even going deeper into the plot, I found myself in a lot of places that were very fun to explore. Contrarily, the region does feel a lot smaller than it looks. I would often look at my next destination, visit the Pokemart to stock up for a long journey, only to fight a couple of trainers and end up in the next town. It's still a big region. The way the map is laid out just gives you the idea that there's a lot more in between each city. The other thing this game is consistent with is the balanced gameplay. Gym leaders get increasingly harder as you move forward, yet I never felt any fight was impossible. The EXPL is available available from the start, although I never felt over-leveled. Speaking of the EXP, the way it works in Gadir is pretty different from other Pokemon games. Each party member's EXP sharing can be toggled on and off at any point, so if someone gets too far ahead, you can just take them off of it, letting the rest of your team catch up faster. Now, Gadir does have a few regional forms and a few Fakeamon, two things I didn't really want many of the games I chose for this video to offer, although they aren't that prevalent throughout the game. I honestly forgot they existed on multiple occasions. They never overshadow the hundreds of canon Pokemon, and even when an enemy trainer does throw a Fakeamon at you, having type icons next to their health bar never allowed them to be a problem. Other than a few nitpicks, the adventure and gameplay of Gadir are straightforward and satisfying to progress through. They're not mindless, nor are they brain-dead easy. I just never had a moment where I felt myself or someone else would get stuck for a long period of time. However, I did not enjoy the story. It's not bad, it's a fairly simple plot with a lot of moments I could easily predict. My personal problem was how events were delivered as if a deeper story was present. I was pulled over very often to talk to a rival, visit a landmark, or deal with the evil team, but none of the events that played out ever intrigued me more than a fan project with like half the dialogue and cutscenes. It's honestly not that big of a deal, the text is still pretty easy to skip through if you don't care for the story. I just feel inclined to share those details for anyone else who might get the same expectations of the plot I did after the first few minutes of the game. Like I said before, Gadir Deluxe is very easy to play and progress through, making it a perfect game for someone who wants a laid-back but still interesting Pokemon adventure. Okay, what if you don't want any story? No rival battles, no evil team, at least none that are mandatory. Just one really big region with 18 gym leaders. But you know what's better than one really big region with 18 gym leaders? Two really big regions with 18 gym leaders. Now you're probably thinking, there's no way a game like that exists, at least not to an enjoyable or passable quality, because that's exactly what I thought when I first played Pokemon Hydro Bliss. But for all the content this game has, it's actually pretty good. Hydro Bliss begins with the option between the Haido or the Kosei region. I'm gonna say right now, you should pick the second one. Neither choice locks you out of content in either region, nor is one substantially harder or even meant to be played first. The only reason I think you should start with one over the other is the quality gap in between them. This game is colossal, and depending on your confidence to play all the way through, I think picking the more detailed region to begin your adventure is a much better choice. At the end of the day though, I don't really care which of the two choices you make, pick whatever you want. If it weren't obvious, Hydro Bliss is an open world game, outside of the first 20-something minutes because there's literally only one path you can take from the starting town. You can technically go to any town and challenge any gym in any order. But the way the open world is handled is really good, because you're likely going to open the map and think, oh my god, 18 gyms, where do I go first? What do I do? This is so overwhelming. When you arrive in a new town, there's almost always going to be two paths to choose from. Sometimes there's a secret third option, like this town has a train station that takes you halfway across the region, but 9 times out of 10, it's going to be, do I go left or do I go right? Do I go down or do I go up? And this might sound limited, but think long term for a second. Every path you didn't take just adds to the list of places you can visit later. By the time you're halfway through one region, you not only have a list of familiar places to go back and venture forward from, the overwhelming feeling of an open world 18 gym region will feel much lighter because you're halfway done. In both of these regions, you'll find almost every single Pokemon from all 9 generations, because if you're going to make a playable world this big, it does make sense to have nearly everyone. I think the only Pokemon missing are a few legendaries. What's important is that there aren't any new forms, nor are there any original species. There are 300 new moves though. That might sound a little overwhelming and maybe intimidating, but I'm gonna be honest, a good portion of them are just existing attacks cloned to other types, which is still really cool. Hydro Bliss is probably the perfect game for someone who doesn't want any mandatory story content, yet also doesn't want to be burdened by the difficulty or lack of originality in an enhancement hack. It's simply an open world game with a lot of content that's put together pretty well. Every game on the list thus far has had two things in common. They have Pokemon from all 9 generations and include the EXP All. This next one has neither of those, yet manages to remain down to earth and casual friendly, while having enough content that separates itself from the mainline titles. The main appeal of Eon Guardians, at least in my opinion, is the list of adjustments to every Pokemon in the game. Eon Guardians only uses Pokemon from the first 4 generations, and normally the problem with only having that many available is narrowing your team building options down to the ones that don't suck. However, when you examine each one's learn sets and stat spreads, adjusting them to a more balanced state, 493 Pokemon actually feels like 493 Pokemon. And these adjustments don't impede on the Pokemon's existing identity. Base stat changes rarely go above 15 to 20 for an individual stat. Additions to level up move pools usually just add more options within their typing, and 1 or 2 new coverage options. And as far as I know, no one has had their typing changed. Yes, I did look at the ones that normally would. You can push these changes to their limits in the game's hard mode, or enjoy a laid-back experience in the easy mode. I like that in the hard mode there was actually a noticeable level of challenge presented in many fights outside of just the gym leaders, rivals, and antagonist group leaders. Eon Guardians doesn't have the most groundbreaking plot. As a matter of fact, I think the amount of dialogue often outweighs the depth of the current situation. Although I actually don't think that's that big of a deal, or at least not as much as my criticisms of the second game in this video, which has a lot to do with the size of the region. When the story is present, the amount of talking slightly overstays its welcome, but there is a lot of content in between these moments. The region is very big, there's about 10 levels of content in between each gym leader, and coliseums to grind at if you ever fall under-leveled. I don't often save the best for last. I actually prefer to start with it more than not. I feel like if I begin with this one though, it would probably take away all the attention from the other 4. Solar Eclipse attempts to capture the feeling of the older main series games, especially the DS era. Now, those titles were good, but I'm not one to hold on to nostalgia, and I'm not afraid to admit this game practically blows them out of the water while keeping their charm. You're immediately greeted with a simple yet satisfying character customization sequence before being handed a variety of gameplay modifiers. I like that you can mostly ignore the latter section by just picking a base difficulty setting. Your adventure takes place in the region of Solaria. It's big, it's pretty, the routes are well designed and fun to explore, the biome diversity is extremely strong, the music fits well with every location, though best of all, it's paced really well. I personally think when any Pokemon game starts to get good is when you reach the late 30s, early 40s, a state when most of your team is able to fully evolve and start learning powerful moves. Solar Eclipse wastes no time getting you there. It doesn't latch on to the early game. EXP gain is very quick without putting you too far ahead of your opponents. Speaking of moves, Solar Eclipse makes updates to a massive amount of Pokemon, learn sets, abilities, move states, and so on. Most of the changes to moves and abilities themselves are fairly underwhelming, but like in a good way. 10 more base power here, 10% greater accuracy there, this move has its effect chance raised, etc. Level up sets, on the other hand, are very different. You're going to get a lot more useful attacks just from experience. This was one of my favorite parts of the entire game. I grew up playing Drayano Hex, Sacred Gold, Storm Silver, Volt White, and this sort of encapsulated that feeling of my Pokemon getting so powerful so early without directly copying the changes from those hacks. With all the Pokemon fan games I've played, I'm gonna admit it's very common for me to become quite bored of the repetitive 8 gym, 1 evil team, 2 to 3 rival formula most of them use. Solar Eclipse doesn't stray very far from that plot structure, although I still found its story to be somewhat entertaining and satisfying. I think it's mainly the healthy balance of dialogue in between gameplay moments. The story understands its own depth and doesn't go overboard on dialogue and cutscenes. I also think the music played a good part, the choices for each moment in the story and narrative were chosen well. Solar Eclipse is really good, easily in the top 5 new releases this year. I highly suggest it to anyone who hasn't played, because no matter what your personal taste is regarding fan projects, the game is nothing short of a fun, casual, and laid-back experience.